What's up, everyone? This is Pooka bringing you another video. And this time, I've gotten a lot of requests for the deck list for my Vileplume deck from Bad Deck Monday. And, since so many people were asking, I just decided, heck, let's make a video about it. Why not? So this video is just going to be used to look at the Vileplume deck that I used in a previous video. And we're just going to jump right into it. Nothing real fancy about this video, we're just going to take a look at this deck. Alright, so it's going to revolve around Vileplume. We're going to switch to the all cards view, just to give a bigger view of all the cards. Alright, so the purpose of this deck is to get out Vileplume. Now, of course, it's a stage 2 Pokemon. It's difficult to get into play, but once you do, it has Allergy Panic, this ability. Weakness turns into ×4 instead of ×2. And if you actually play on Pokemon TCG Online, if you ever see this, you'll see the weakness actually physically changes on the card from ×2 into a ×4 instead, which is kind of neat. Alright, so you want to get Vileplume into play. That's the goal. Now, once you get this into play, your goal is to try to take advantage of a weakness. Pretty much every Pokemon in the game has a weakness, except for that pesky Sableye. He actually is the one Pokemon that gives this deck a lot of trouble. But pretty much everything else has a weakness, and we're going to exploit that. How are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we got a Pokemon of every type. We have a Combee for a grass type. Sting Missile does 30, and then you shuffle Combee back into your deck. It's Don't be fooled by that smile on Combee. He's a secret serial killer. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this chat here. You never know what can pop up there. Alright, so Combee is our grass type. Chimchar is our fire type. Can flare. Then we have a Lapras with Reckless Charge. Does 40. And Emolga. This one's actually one of the coolest Pokemon in the deck, because not only does it have Call for Family to get 2 basic Pokemon out, but it also has Static Shock, which will be our lightning attack. Alright, next up we have Munna, which simply has Ram for 20. Stunfisk has Muddy Water, those 20 and 22 bench Pokemon. Also has Rumble, if you ever want to do that. This card saw a lot of play when it first came out, and then cards just kind of got way too strong for it. Then we have Rayquaza. The Dragon Pulse is your main attack here, so that covers your Dragon type. There aren't too many Dark Pokemon that hit for a small amount of energy. Zorua, is the best one. For 2 colorless energy, that's 1 double colorless energy. We can scratch for 20. And then finally, there are no EX Pokemon weak to metal that are actually played very much. Maybe Articuno is the only one that sees a little bit of play, but I would not call that popular in any way. The one we actually have to worry about is the Plasma Kyurem that's actually not an EX. So we're going to play this Cobalion EX to Righteous Edge and discard the special energy attached to the Kyurem as well. That'll be your attacker against that stuff. And I'm not sure if any Pokemon are actually weak to colorless anymore, but if they are, we got Audino to hit bump. And if not, we have Busybody. Alright, now you might look at this and you say, well, you got Allergy Panic. ×4 weakness, alright. So your attack's going to add up quickly. But your Pokemon are only doing 20 damage. What's the point? You're only going to be able to do 20 × 4. That's 80. That doesn't add up at all. And you'd be correct. However, a new card from Plasma Blast came out called Silver Bangle. And when you attach this to your Pokemon, as long as you don't attach it to an EX, your attacks do 30 more damage to Pokemon EX before applying weakness and resistance. Now, what does this mean? Alright, let's say you're going up against a brand new Genesect EX, 170 HP, big, massive Pokemon, and you get out your Vileplume, and you set up your Chimchar. Okay? Now, normally you just do 20. But then you attach this Silver Bangle. Now you're doing 50. And when you do 50 ×4, now your Chimchar does 200 damage to a Genesect EX. Alright? So this is the goal of the deck. We're just trying to hit EXs for 200 damage. We run 1 Pokemon of every type to cover every type. And that's pretty much it. Most of the decks nowadays revolve around EX attackers. Of course, this deck falls apart very quickly when you don't run into EX Pokemon. Decks like Garchomp, Altaria, Empoleon, maybe even Zebstrika, I don't know. Any deck that does not use EX Pokemon is going to give you trouble, because you only do 20 and 30 damage, and you can't use that Silver Bangle. So this is really a metagame kind of deck. It's kind of cool. I don't think it actually works very well, but it's a neat deck to try out. So here's the Pokemon, of course. We're going to scroll down to the trainers. Now, I just want to give kind of a warning here. This deck list is going to be ugly. It is just going to look terrible. And that's because it kind of has to be. We have to run, let's go back up here. We have to run a Vileplume line, a fairly heavy Vileplume line, 3-1-3. You know, 3 Oddish, 1 Gloom, 3 Vileplume. Because you need to get it out, otherwise your deck doesn't work. So we need to devote 7 spots here already. And then we need to run 1 Pokemon of every type. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 Pokemon. So we're already starting off with 17 Pokemon. Alright, that's a lot for most decks these days. You may be able to do without the Audino, and you may be able to do without the Combee, because Oddish actually does 20 damage as well. But, let's be honest, it's a lot better to knock out an EX with a Combee. I mean, just look at this thing. Come on. That thing's going to knock out a Keldeo EX in one hit? Answer is yes, I've done it. And it is awesome. Combee is the greatest. Okay, so, we have to take up a lot of space with the Pokemon. Then you have to look at the trainers. Well, I need Rare Candy. Normally you would run 4 Rare Candy. I can only afford space for 2 of these because, well, I have to run a lot of other cards. Okay? We also need Silver Bangle. This is the whole point of the deck. I would love to have 4 of these. I can't afford to. I can only get 3 in the deck. And then we have Pokemon Catcher. Geez, you would love to have 4 of these as well. I only have 1. Alright, so this deck list looks really ugly. And that's because we're trying to focus on setting up more than anything. You know, if your deck can't set up, you're going to lose. So we have a solid number of supporters. We'll start here. I feel like this is always the most important part of the deck. So we have 4N. Of course, this is probably the most popular card. It's in pretty much every deck. Usually 4 copies in just about every deck. 4N. And only 2 Professor Juniper. Now, this might seem really weird because Juniper is really, really strong. Discard your hand and draw 7 cards. But that first part is the problem. Discard your hand. We cannot afford to discard our hand very often. Alright? Any Silver Bangles we have to discard, boy, that's trouble. Any of these Pokemon we'll have to discard, that could be trouble later on. If I have to discard even 1 Rare Candy, I can end up losing. So, only 2 Juniper. We're favoring some of the other supporters in this deck. 3 Colress, of course. Shuffle your hand into your deck, and then you draw equal to the number of bench Pokemon for both sides. Again, we need like a shuffle draw kind of thing. And then 3 Skyla as well, to help us search for those specific trainer cards that we really need. Now, in place of some supporters here, as you can see, we run 4, 6, 9, and 12 supporters. Not a very high supporter count. And, you know, we don't have a ton of space. But we also run 2 Tropical Beach. Now, you could probably run the deck without them, if you really want to. But I feel like Tropical Beach is really nice, because normally on the first turn, you're really not doing anything. So when you add in the Tropical Beaches as well, you get about 14 supporters, which is, you know, a decent amount. Usually decks like to run at least 12 supporters. That is the minimum that most decks should run. 13, 14, and possibly even 15 are solid numbers to run. So we're settling on 14 here. If we wanted to get risky, we could start to cut one of these. But that's important. We need to be able to set up. Alright, so after that, we have 2 Level Ball. Search for Pokemon with 90 HP or less. And that can search out a lot of Pokemon in my deck. Look, I can get Combee, Oddish, Gloom, Chimchar, Emolga, Munna, Zorua, and Audino. Alright, so we play 2 Level Ball just because it's important to get Oddish into play. We're probably going to use 1 every game to get an Oddish. And we also want to have another one in case we want to search out all these other Pokemon. From there we have Ultra Ball. 2 of those Ultra Ball as well. Of course, this is just your standard card. To search for Pokemon in your deck, discard 2 cards, search for a Pokemon. Again, we can't always afford to discard things though, so I don't want to run a high Ultra Ball count. However, we do normally have excess Pokemon that we can just get rid of, because let's be honest, let's say we're facing a Darkrai deck. Is Munna really going to help us against Darkrai? Probably not. It does 20 damage. Alright, and that's the funny part about this deck. Normally these Pokemon are very, well, not good. They don't do anything. But, given the weakness in Silver Bangle, they're all of a sudden doing 200 EXs. And this is why this deck's so much fun. Alright, next we have 1 Heavy Ball as well. I might want to play 2 of this instead of the second Level Ball, but I do like being able to get Oddish out early on with those Level Balls. Heavy Ball, it actually can't grab as much as I thought, but it can get you Vileplume, that's the big one. Vileplume is a 3 retreat cost. We can get Stunfisk, and Rayquaza. Unfortunately, Lapras and Cobalion EX have 2 retreat costs, so do Audino. So Heavy Ball doesn't actually get us a whole lot of stuff. It gets us, 3 different cards, but that's still probably worth playing it when you get Skyla for it. Alright, so those are the balls. We also need to play 2 Super Rod. Let's think about it, alright? Say we're going up against a Virizion Genesect deck again, and we get that first knockout on a Virizion or a Genesect with this Chimchar. And then they bring up the second one and they knock out the Chimchar. Well, what do we do from there? Well, we can do 20 with this, or 30 with this, or 40 with this. See what I'm saying? We don't really have any other options. Your deck is spread so thin that it really relies on one type of attacker for each matchup. So after Chimchar goes down, we need Super Rod immediately to put it back in and get it back out. Now, I would play Revive, but that happened to rotate out in black and white. The format is now Next Destiny's on, so we cannot play Revive. We have to use Super Rod. That actually hurts this deck quite a bit, but we'll live with what we got. Also, we have 1 Hypnotoxic Laser. I would love to run more of these, but it can add the extra damage we need sometimes to get a knockout. In particular, it's used with Cobalion EX, so you can Righteous Edge against a Plasma Kyurem. When you have Vileplume in play, you'll do 120 damage with the Righteous Edge, and then the Hypnotoxic Laser will do 10 to finish it off. That's pretty much the only reason this is in this deck. It's almost like a 4th Silver Bangle, but against Kyurem instead of, in general against the EXs. And sometimes it can even help against EXs with your normal Pokemon. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Maybe against a Rayquaza EX, you could use this Rayquaza and then Dragon Pulse for 160, and then do the final 10 with your laser. And it also works if your opponent does put out a Virbank City Gym. Maybe Stunfisk can rumble a Darkrai and then laser Virbank for a knockout there. So laser is always a good card. I don't feel like I need to justify that too much. Alright, and then from there we have switching cards. Most decks run 4 switching cards, I would say. We can only afford to run 2 Floatstone and then 1 switch. That's really all we have. Now, normally, I would just expect my Pokemon to get knocked out, so that's why I don't play too many switches. I don't feel like, first of all, Laser's going to see less play, I think, because of Virizion EX. Second of all, if my opponent uses a Hypnotoxic Laser on me, I'm probably just going to get knocked out. Alright, so I don't have to worry about staying asleep. Chimchar probably doesn't survive very long. Maybe Stunfisk and Rayquaza can survive, but most of these Pokemon are just going to get knocked out in one hit. Which you don't mind, you're taking 2 prizes for 1. That's the point of the deck. Alright, so we only have 3, switching cards, I guess. Floatstone just gives you free retreat. It's nice to plop that down in a Vileplume so that it doesn't keep getting Catchered out. So Floatstone is nice. And your Floatstones tend to stay on your Pokemon a little bit because if you have Silver Bangles in play, your opponent would rather Tool Scrapper those right away instead of going after your Floatstone. Hopefully you don't have both in play at once. That way their Tool Scrapper only gets 1 of your tools. And then for the ace spec, it seemed pretty obvious to me for this deck, and that is Dowsing Machine. Since the deck is spread so thin with so many trainers, that should be more of what we have. We should have higher counts of so many more things. Dowsing Machine gives you a little flexibility. Maybe you need that last Silver Bangle. Maybe you need another Catcher, another Switch card, etc., etc. So that's why we have Dowsing Machine in this deck. I feel like it's the best for this kind of a deck. So that wraps up the Pokemon and the trainers. And last part is the energy. And this is actually an extremely difficult part of this deck to build. So first things first, we're going to run 4 Prism energy. That should be pretty obvious. We run so many different types. We need Prism. That's it. It can provide any type when it's attached to a basic. Simple. Alright, from there it gets trickier though. I would love to run basic energy in this deck, so that when I Super Rod, I can actually Super Rod them back in. But which types do you focus on? It's too difficult to say what you're going to run into. So instead, we just run more Blend energy. Run 2 of this kind that covers the Lightning, Water, Metal, and Fighting. And then we run 2 of the other type, which covers Grass, Fire, Psychic, Dark. Alright, that's just to give us 2 more types, or 2 more types of energy for, each of those types. I really don't know if there's a better way to do this, but that's what I thought of first. And then also 3 Double Colorless energy. Now these are going to be used for those Pokemon like Audino, Lapras, Munna, Zorua, and maybe Oddish. Alright, so we got 3 of those, just enough to kind of plop them down in one turn and go from there. We can also attach twice to them, but that's going to be costly. Now the bad part is we only run 11 energy, so every energy has to count when you're playing this deck. You can't, this is another reason why the Juniper has to be low in this deck. We cannot carelessly discard energy, otherwise we'll just run out, and there's no way to recover them. Enhanced Hammer is one of this deck's worst enemies for sure. And, I mean, if you go up against Sableye, you might just want to concede the game and move on. Sableye is a pain in the butt. If it doesn't have Enhanced Hammer, it's not as bad. But otherwise, why does that thing not have a weakness? That just ruins this deck. If you guys can come up with something that can knock out a Sableye for 1 energy, I would play that in this deck. Otherwise, what do we have? We can hit bump it for 30. Maybe Lapras with a laser and if they have a Burbank in play, we can Reckless Charge. Same with the Rayquaza's Dragon Pulse. Otherwise, you got to knock that thing out in 2 hits, and that is painful. Letting Sableye use that Junk Hunt attack twice. Ugh. So I don't know. Maybe I'll find a way to deal with Sableye in the future, but I haven't really put too much thought into this deck, to be completely honest. Alright, well that's going to wrap up the list. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you have a better in-depth look at this deck now. To be honest, I don't feel like it is going to be competitive in any way. This is just too much stuff to get going. But it's worth a laugh, that's for sure. When you can pull off a Muddy Water for 200 damage, I've done Dragon Pulse for 280 before. It's awesome. It's so cool to see that happen. And, you know, even Combee uses Sting Missile against the Keldeo EX for, 240. I've done that before as well. It's cool to see all these little Pokemon that we don't really get to see too often actually get to knock out things that are useful. Alright, so that's going to wrap up the video. I am Pooka here from the Top Cut. I'll have some more videos for you soon, and I'll see you guys next time.